Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Laura Haywood, and today I'm joined by the two brilliant lead actors from Children of a Lesser God, currently in previews at Studio 54 on Broadway. Joshua Jackson, star of The Affair on Showtime, who you might also recognize from Dawson's Creek, plays James Leeds, a hearing teacher of deaf students, and Lauren Ridloff, a former sign language tutor and deaf Miss America, is Sarah Norman, who initially resists his teachings, but comes around in more ways than one. Mark Medoff's 1979 play is as resonant today as it ever was, and I'm thrilled to have Joshua and Lauren here to tell us all about it. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, thank you.
We also have Candace here, who's going to help us interpret for Lauren, who is deaf. And actually, Josh, you've been learning ASL, and maybe you'll do a little interpreting as well.
I will not be doing any interpreting. And actually, I've been learning Signed English, which is a different language. It's the language of speaking people, hearing people, translated into signs rather than ASL, which is the language of deaf people amongst deaf people. So a little bit different.
So what?
Actually, a lot bit different, to tell you the truth.
Is it the words that are different? Is it the grammar and structure?
Well, both, but grammar mostly. She can.
Yeah, actually, American Sign Language has its origins in France. The grammar is more similar to French than English. It has its own semantic rules, syntax. So what Josh has learned, we might call pigeon signed English. So he's learned signs, but he puts them in the order to fit the way he speaks. So it's easier for a hearing person to learn and sign in that way than to use American Sign Language. So similar to spoken.
When you communicate to Josh, do you use ASL or do you switch into signed English?
So it depends. If he's being nice to me, then I follow English order.
And if not?
But actually, I do a mix of American Sign Language and English with him because Josh really is a natural. He has picked up some nice ASL during the process. I don't know, we met a little over a year ago now, I think. Yeah. So he can't help but learn some ASL.
Of course.
Little by little by little.
When you started learning, Josh, did you start with the script and learn your lines along with the signs, or did you learn the language and then take on the script?
No, I didn't think that I would be able to learn the language, have a broad enough grasp of the language first. So I started from the text and thought that that would be sort of my entryway in. And then it was actually through the process of trying to learn the text and learn the signs at the same time in the rehearsal process with Lauren last year that I've expanded my vocabulary a little. I'm still learning, but now, I mean, now I'm actually finally able to have a conversation.
When you forget a line on stage, you can improvise, but if you forget a sign on stage, how do you handle it?
Well, when I know that I've forgotten or transposed a word that's not supposed to be there, I just see it in her eyes. So usually I just ask afterwards, like, what mistake was that? Because I'm not quite sure what I did. The hardest part is not actually dropping a sign. It's when I'm doing what's called simcomming, which is signing and speaking at the same time. Because the two sides of your brain are kind of at war with each other the whole time. If one of them goes out, like if I'm making like for instance, make and work, and if I use the wrong word with that sign, it just kind of stops me in my tracks. So that's actually the hardest part, is keeping the train going no matter what happens.
When you get really experienced.
It's true.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add, when I watch Josh doing the simcomming, it's like doing this thing, right? I think of him and think how does he say the word and have to sign something in an opposite order that's quite a slightly different meaning. I don't know how he does it.
Well, I was saying if you get really experienced, maybe you'll be able to say one thing and sign something else and throw people off.
It happens, like particularly when I'm interpreting. That's what I mean. Like there's a line that I struggle with all the time in the restaurant scene, where she's signing to me, I don't want what you're trying to give me. My language is good enough. And what I respond, how I interpret it, is you don't need what I'm trying to give you. My language is more than enough, which doesn't sound like a huge difference, but to see and be reading off of her hands one thing and have my brain and then my mouth try to say something not the same is really difficult. It's one of those lines that like every night we get to it, I'm like, please, 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 damn.
Well, it looked great on Saturday night when I was
Good.
there.
That's good. One thing that I do love that has happened a few times during rehearsals, never during the show, but during rehearsals or just in a social situation, sometimes Josh forgets to use his voice. He's signing away,
Yes.
and he forgets there are hearing
Yeah.
people there.
That sounds good. That means he's assimilating into your culture as opposed to expecting you to assimilate into his. Which brings us to the subject of the play. When were you first aware, each of you, about Children of a Lesser God?
Yeah, right. He said when he was young, 1970, 86, when the movie first came out. I was 8 at that time, and my parents knew about the movie. And even though it might not have been age appropriate, my parents took me to see it because they wanted me to have an opportunity to see someone who was like me on the big screen. And that, for the first time, for an 8-year-old, when I saw that, a woman, deaf woman, signing beautifully on the screen, it just meant a lot. I mean, that's how I first knew the story or came to know the story.
Did you ever imagine that you would be a part of a production of this show?
No, never. Never occurred to me. The story has been done so many times around the country, in high schools, colleges, regional theaters, community theaters. There have been productions everywhere. And it's always been done pretty much by a deaf white woman. Mm-hmm. So it never entered my mind that Sarah could represent herself and be on Broadway this time as a person of color.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful part of the production, and I thank our director and creative team, Kenny Leon and everybody, for making that choice.
Yeah, it's beautifully done, and you're the perfect actress in the part. Josh,
Thank you.
You said you knew the story when you were young as well. Did you see the movie?
I saw the movie. Yeah, I remember my mother taking me to see it as well. My mother gave me a wildly inappropriate film education when I was a young man. So I remember seeing it, but because it didn't represent something as deeply personal for me, I had only truly vague memories of it. And I had seen a production in Vancouver at some point over the course of the years, but really my full introduction of really paying attention and diving into it has been this process.
Mm-hmm. I saw Marlee Matlin came to your first preview.
Yeah.
Who was the star
I'm
of the
glad
movie.
they told us after.
Did you get to talk to her?
Yeah, I was so glad. You know, I was glad. Yes, we did. And I don't know how I would have felt if I would have known she was sitting right out there in the audience watching me perform. Such an iconic. I mean, it made her an icon for us all.
And now you're that icon. You're about to be.
Whoa.
So the story is about a teacher who works at a school for the deaf that employs no deaf teachers.
Correct.
Right? And the idea is that deaf students need to be taught to lip read and use their voices in a sort of traditional way,
Right.
so that they can assimilate.
Right. A hearing community. You taught me this the other day. Community.
Community?
Community. Culture.
Community.
Right. See.
Right.
Learning every day. But so in the place that it was set, so it's not just a deaf school, it's a deaf residential school, which is important because it kind of becomes a cloister for that community of people. And in that time, and you can speak to this better than I can, in that time it was considered the proper way to teach deaf and hard of hearing children that they had to lip read and speak in order to join the mainstream culture. And as we have come to find out, that actually simcomming is not helpful for the learning of language, and that not teaching deaf children to learn their native language amongst themselves is really detrimental to their learning curve. And so we're set inside of that world, which is very specific to that time, and thankfully we've moved past some of it, but the broader point of not communicating with each other, of trying to make somebody us to make them okay, I think that's still very much what we're going through today.
It never occurred to me that deaf students would be taught by hearing teachers before I became aware of this show.
Well, ASL wasn't considered a language until the early 80s, right? Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So just imagine, like, not only were hearing people teaching deaf children, the language that was of and for and by the deaf community wasn't considered a true and proper language. So, I mean, you can deny a person's culture and self, but you literally took the language out of their mouth and said, sorry, that's not valid.
Right.
So that kind of, I mean, I think that's why it was such a revolutionary representation when this was put on stage the first time. It brought something that had eluded all of us hearing people,
Right.
but was living in and around and amongst us, and brought it into the broader consciousness.
So one of the things that I discovered in my research
yes.
was that you were a teacher, Lauren.
Yes, that's right.
So your Twitter feed has like a 3 or 4 year gap in it. You've recently started tweeting again, but if you scroll down a little bit, I found all these tweets from 2009 about your experiences with your students. And I'm wondering how being a deaf...
Oh my God.
What
did I say back then?
There's stuff... It's a beautiful little snapshot into what your life was like as a teacher. And I encourage everybody to go back and read that stuff. I'm curious as to whether your own experiences as a student were what led you to be a teacher, whether you had deaf or hearing teachers, and what your experience as a student and a teacher brings to this role that you're playing now.
I will try my best to keep my answer short, if I can. My upbringing, in a way, was similar to Sarah's, so that makes me feel a connection to Sarah. Our backgrounds are similar. I went to a mainstream program. My parents communicated to me using sign language in exact English order and English. We SimCommed, used voice and sign, speaking and signing. So when I was in elementary school, I didn't really meet a lot of other deaf children or deaf adults. So again, that's why my parents really wanted me to see the movie. They wanted me to know there are other people like me out there. I'm not the only one. So now fast forward to high school. My parents decided that I should try to go to a residential school for the deaf. And that was for the purposes of learning more about who I am and who was my identity going to be. And I really am so grateful to my parents for that opportunity. I learned to communicate with people who also didn't sign and didn't use, I used my voice for years. And so to go to this residential school as a teenager when I was 13 and be able to make connections with other people who learned sign language, and I learned that that was the easiest way to communicate. There was no effort. It changed my life. It changed my perception of myself. So there at this deaf residential school, we had deaf teachers, and there were just so many deaf role models, as well as hearing role models who could sign, that it made me feel I had a positive outlook on life and myself from there on. And I always loved to write. I love English. There's something beautiful to me about words, and ASL is just as gorgeous. And so I like both, and I feel comfortable expressing myself in English, again, because of my upbringing, where I was the only child that was deaf and spent a lot of time reading and writing. And so with that, I wanted to write. And so then I thought I wanted to teach children who were deaf and hearing. And those hearing children had parents who were deaf. So those hearing children's first language was ASL, American Sign Language. And that experience as a teacher was wonderful for me. I really wanted to work with them, and so I would get a better perspective on the world of what they thought, and I wanted to be able to write books for all of those children. Then, moving on, I know this is not answering all of your question, but I made the decision to stop using my voice when I was 13, and that's very similar to the character Sarah, so I felt a connection there in that story, a personal connection for me. That was quite lovely.
My favorite thing about the making of this show was how you were discovered. You took your teaching background and were hired to be a tutor for director Kenny Leon, having no idea that you would end up being considered for, not to mention being cast as, the leading role.
Right.
It feels
Right.
kind of like a miracle that you were found in this way, and I especially love that even though your co-star is someone who has been acting professionally for decades, you're both making your Broadway debut together. So you're coming in not as a beginner and a veteran, but as two people exploring a new world. Either one of you want to speak on that?
First of all, I want to say that we're equal and we're unequal, right? That's what I like about working with Joshua. I learned so much from him, and I think he learns from me too. I think it goes both ways. So we're both growing from this experience, and so I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, as am I. I mean, in the very beginning, the way that she came, I mean, it's like the craziest Hollywood story ever, right? But the way that she came to be this was just by being amazing. And the experience of being in the room with her when we did the first read-through, which was when I first met her, but when it dawned on everybody that, like, here she is, this is Sarah, and the experience of the power of you in that room was shattering. For me and for everybody else who was watching, it was like one of those electric things that can only happen in a live experience. And then, speaking of learning from each other, the process for me of going back to being a pre-verbal person and having somebody who, maybe it was the teacher in you, the mother in you, the decent human being in you, but someone who was patient enough with me to work through, well, I mean, I could not speak your language. We couldn't communicate directly. We could communicate through other people, and we could communicate through the text of the script, but to foster the relationship that's necessary to be a leading man and a leading lady in a play or in any show, we didn't have that space, and I had to learn, literally grow up in this language in order to be able to have this dynamic with you, and you were kind-hearted enough to let me fumble my way through, which is why I think our bond is so strong now. It has been, that process of learning and vulnerability, frankly. It's annoying to be a full-grown person and not have language suddenly.
Yeah.
Yeah, also, I'm grateful to have the experience with Josh because he's an amazing teacher too. I'm new to this profession of acting, and I've learned so much just by watching him, from him, seeing what he's doing. What would Joshua Jackson do? And the same is true with Kenny Leon. We have a unique relationship. We started where I was the teacher. He was my student.
Yeah.
And then, surprise of all surprises, our roles get reversed, and he becomes a teacher to me, and I'm his student. So it's been really great. And we've been able to find the same language. We have equal respect and understanding. So I feel my beginning experience with Kenny has also guided me through the process of working with the whole cast and working with Josh and all of the actors.
So this is a story that's very much about the deaf experience, or a deaf experience. I would like to know that as an actress, what characters would you like to play that are not defined by their ability or not lack of ability to hear?
Well, in general, or in just this play, but in general, I would love to be some kind of superhero, superwoman.
Yes.
Why not? I think Wonder Woman or, the Black Panther movie.
Yeah. Oh, you guys were teaching the signs for Black Panther on social media.
Okay, so I know there's a bunch of different ways to sign Black Panther, but the Wakanda Forever thing, I don't know. I wish I knew somebody who is part of the creative team of that movie, because it's Protect Love is the sign that they make, and if they did that accidentally, that's amazing. But it wouldn't surprise me given how much detail that they. Oh, do you know?
I know a little bit. I don't know if it's really by accident, but I did just learn that the director, Ryan Coogler, his wife used to be an interpreter, an ASL interpreter. So just saying,
there are no accidents.
Maybe it was intentional.
Yeah,
right?
because when I was watching, I was like, oh shit! I know that.
Oh, that's a sign that I learned from your show, by the way.
Oh well, that's kind of a make 'em up. Well, she can tell.
What? That's not.
That's the sign.
No, it's not the real sign. I mean, the real sign for shit is this.
Yeah.
And we all signed that in the play too. That does happen in the play. But
Bullshit.
this bullshit is really a word play or a sign play, a play with signs. It's not how we really signed that word.
Got it. Well, that was my big takeaway.
Right.
So. But now I know.
Yeah, we took artistic license. I want to say something about the play too, that it is about a deaf woman and a hearing man, and really just their struggle to connect, their struggle to really listen and understand each other, because I think that is deeper than that. It's not just a deaf woman and a hearing man. It's about a human being, one human and another human trying to hear each other, and they can't because they're so caught in their own assumptions, their own ideas of what life should be like.
And that to me is so much like the hallmark of really good writing, because it's very specific in that it is a hearing man, a deaf woman set in this time, in this space, in this school. But it's also universal, like Lauren is saying. That love story and that inability that as humans, that tragic inability that we can never actually walk a mile in another's shoes. Mm-hmm. And if we have the desire to make somebody over as ourselves in order to think that we can understand them, we will fail in that every time. Mm-hmm. And that I don't think has it has something to do with hearing and deaf, but I think that's just a very human experience, that in our discomfort, in our inability to accept others, we're like, well, no, if I can just fix that, it'll make everything okay. And as soon as we do that, we break it. And it's that's a weakness inside of ourselves, and I think we all harbor that, and we all do it. I'm certainly guilty of it. And so I think that at the heart of the story is really that the tragedy of that love, that they can't, even in love, get past that desire to mold something in your own image. And I think that's really powerful, and I think that speaks to a broader, more universal human condition than the specificity of the hearing and the deaf worlds.
Sure.
Yeah. There's one scene when James Leeds is talking about being in the safe space, this story about going back, sorry. So there's one moment in the play, the scene where James Leeds talks about being in Ecuador. And he'd gone there to teach them how to grow Brussels sprouts. And I think, okay, that's nice, but that's not the only way to survive, right? So what he thinks, I'm sorry I'm picking on James Leeds, I don't want to make him feel bad, but James talks about how we are supposed to experience music in another scene. But there's not just one way to experience music. So there's so many ways. And so I think it's a way that something that all of us are guilty at doing at one point in our lives. We think we want to help someone, or we're trying to save them, or by doing something, and by doing that, we are forgetting to listen. We're breaking it, we're oppressing them, we're putting our own idea onto them.
This is absolutely a play about listening, about learning to listen, the need to commit to listening, and sometimes to the difference between listening and hearing someone and truly understanding them. I'm excited that we get to open up the floor to the audience and get some questions from them.
Hi, my question is for Lauren. What is,
Hi.
how was it transitioning from being a teacher into being an actress and starring in a play?
That's a really good question. It wasn't a quick journey for me. I actually took some time off to become a stay-at-home mom in between that. And then I got into theater. And this whole journey, this transition has been great because I've been able to work with people like Kenny Leon and Joshua Jackson and the other actors in the company. So it's been a really nice transition.
It is, like Joshua said, a Hollywood-type story. What would you think about the idea of that transition and that journey being made into a film?
Make that become a film. Oh, well.
The Lauren Ridloff story?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness.
And it could include the production of Children of a Lesser God within the film. What do you say? You're a writer. Maybe you should write it. Let's take another question.
So my question is for Joshua. First, I just want to make a comment. I just feel amazing the fact that I feel like when I grew up, and my best friend could tell you, I felt like I was pacey when I was in high school. So like, thank you for that, for giving me
Thank you for
a place
watching.
to stand. And coming from that, like you've had such a successful career, what do you think has been the show was 20 years ago. What do you think has attributed to you consistently being a successful actor coming from a project so long ago?
What's your name?
Markel,
Josh. The truth is, it hasn't been consistent success. I mean, there's been a lot of ups and downs over the course of 20 years. It's more, like, I'm more proud of surviving than I am of being on a constant success rate. So taking those bumps and bruises is definitely part of it, and I've done things that haven't been successful, and I've done things where I haven't been very good. But the thing for me to keep going is finding the fire, the thing that makes you want to go through, because sometimes it's not pleasant, and sometimes it's long hours, and sometimes it's shitty people. And every once in a while you get something that just lights your life on fire, like what I'm getting to do right now. But truly, like this is a life-changing experience for me. I get to be on Broadway, that's a life-changing experience, period. I get to learn a language that allows me inside of a community that has existed all around me my entire life and I never saw, right? That's a life-changing experience. I get this bond. I mean, this thing that we're doing is fucking magic. We're on the internet.
We just taught everybody how to sign
Say
shit.
shit, right,
Like,
I forget. Right, this is how you can tell I'm old. I'm like, oh, there's cameras, we can't curse. But, that's a very unique experience. And I have a couple of dynamics like this over the course of my career that I'm very happy to have had, where I worked with somebody who you would go through the wall for, right? Who every day is a learning experience, and that's the thing. Like, just find something that keeps the fire lit. And thank you for the question.
Lauren, did you watch Joshua on TV when you were growing up?
No, I didn't.
I mean, it's probably for the best.
We have time for one more.
We're going to take our last question from an online viewer. Lisa would like to know, what was the reaction like with the deaf community with this play?
I'm happy you asked that. So it's not often that the deaf community gets to see someone representing them in a film or on theater or in TV. So when that happens, I think the deaf community really wants to see what's being presented. Is that deaf person representing them accurately? And the challenge here is this story happens in a place in the late 70s, early 80s. So of course some things might feel like, wait a minute, we're not like that anymore. That doesn't happen today. So I feel that where our director, Kenny, has really pulled this play through is by showing that Sarah is a human being. She is an individual who was labeled retarded. Today we know that term retarded is not PC. We wouldn't use that term today. It's not accurate. And it does show how far we've come. But in this time period, it shows Sarah as a deaf woman who had been labeled retarded till the age of 12. She was in a small world all of her life, and she doesn't know what veal piccata is. But she's going through her journey, and she's clearly brilliant. She's able to give a very profound speech about herself. And she practiced really hard on making the perfect quiche. So I'm really proud of this character, Sarah. I think she's come a long way, a long way. So I believe when the deaf community comes to see this, they are gonna like seeing this Sarah, especially with the fact that she's a woman of color.
I think it's also crucial that we mention this production has gone far and away beyond any other production that's ever been on Broadway in terms of accessibility. There are super titles, there will be ASL interpreters, there's actually an app that people can use. There's an announcement at the beginning of the show that says, if you see someone on your cell phone, stop judging them and start listening, because this is a way that they are able to follow along with the content of the show when they're not actually able to hear it. So the deaf community is invited in so many ways, and I think that that is really, really important. I want to close out by saying that even though I said the sign that I took away was this bullshit sign, the real one that I took away was this. The idea of connection. And in the speech you just referenced, Lauren, about, oh my gosh, was I doing it wrong? I was doing it wrong. Got it. So thumb, forefinger, 2 interlocking circles, and that means connection. But it doesn't just mean connection in a single way. The way you gesture it can mean so many different things. And so I am going to say that after seeing Children of a Lesser God on Broadway, I'm gonna do this. I feel such a connection with you both. And I can't wait for the rest of the world to get to come into this theater, see this, and leave going like this, the connection that they will feel with you as both characters and as performers. Thank you so much for being here today. Oh.